hast 1 million alien warships blockaded Earth, then humanity erased them all. The sky over Geneva turned black at 4:17 in the afternoon, not with clouds, not with smoke, with ships. Admiral Renata Cole stood on the observation deck of Fleet Command, and watched the number climb on the tactical display, refusing to believe it, refusing to blink. 900,000. 950. 1 million. 1 million warships of the Threshold Compact had dropped out of hyperspace in a ring around Earth, engines glowing like a second, hostile sun. Somewhere in the silence that followed, a young ensign whispered the only thing anyone could think to say. "We're going to die today." Cole didn't answer him. She was watching the enemy flagship broadcast its opening message on every channel humanity had ever built. Species designation, human. You have been found guilty in absentia of the crime of survival beyond your permitted era. Compliance is not requested. Compliance is not possible. You have 4 hours to say goodbye to each other. No one in that room knew that in 4 hours, the Threshold Compact would not have a fleet left to give orders with. Asked 3 days earlier, none of this had begun as an execution, it began as a rescue. Asked, Dr. Imani Farouk had been aboard the science vessel, Halcyon for 6 months, cataloging a dead moon in the Kesset Belt, when her sensors picked up a distress beacon in a language no database recognized. She almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she followed protocol, and protocol led her crew to a drifting alien lifeboat, with 3 survivors barely breathing inside cracked void suits. They were Threshold Compact scouts. And they were terrified, not of dying in space, but of being found by humans. "They think we're monsters," said Captain Devon Osei, once the survivors were stable in the Halcyon's medbay. "Look at how they flinch every time someone gets close." The eldest survivor, a reed-thin alien named Ver Kaeth, with skin like tarnished bronze, finally spoke in broken standard once he understood no one intended to hurt him. "You are the undying fire," Ver said, voice trembling, "the species that could not be killed in the second cataclysm. We were taught you burn 3 worlds rather than surrender 1. Devon exchanged a look with Imani. Neither of them had ever heard of a second cataclysm, neither of them had ever burned a world, but someone, somewhere in human history, apparently had let the galaxy believe they did. That single sentence would unravel everything, because when the Halcyon limped home and Devon reported the encounter to Fleet Command, an old file flagged itself in the archives, a file sealed, under a classification that predated the modern government by 2 centuries. Admiral Cole was the one who opened it. What she found made her sit down slowly in an empty conference room and read it 3 times before she believed it. Project Undying Fire, a defense doctrine drafted after humanity's first hostile contact, back when Earth had no allies, no fleet worth the name, and enemies who assumed a young species meant a weak one. The doctrine's authors had made a brutal calculation: humanity could not win a war of attrition against interstellar empires, so they built a reputation instead. A myth. A story so terrifying that no one would ever test whether it was true. For 200 years, it had worked. Humanity expanded, quietly, always shadowed by rumors it never confirmed or denied. Rumors of burned worlds. Rumors of a fleet that did not lose. Rumors and nothing more, until now. Because the Threshold Compact had finally decided to test it. No one expected what happened in the war room that night. "They're not coming to negotiate," said General Marcus Ihejirika, staring at the incoming fleet projections. "They're coming to erase the myth. Permanently, if they beat us and the galaxy finds out we were never that fleet. Every predator out there stops being afraid of us at once. Then we're not just fighting for Earth." Cole said quietly, "We're fighting for every human colony that survives on borrowed fear." Silence spread through the room like frost. It was Devon Osei, a starship captain, not a strategist, still smelling faintly of Halcyon, recycled air, who finally spoke the sentence that changed the war. "Then we stop pretending to be the myth. And we become something worse. Something real." Here is what the Threshold Compact did not know about humanity, the thing that no reputation, no rumor, and no 200-year-old propaganda file could manufacture. Humans had spent 2 centuries, preparing for a day, exactly like this one, not with bigger guns, but with humility. Every human warship carried something the Compact ships did not. A crew that trained for defeat, not just victory, lost drills, failure simulations, officers promoted not for confidence but for what they did when a plan collapsed around them. The aliens had brought overwhelming force. Humanity had brought people who knew exactly what to do when overwhelming force showed up. Verkaith, still recovering in the Halcyon's medbay, asked to speak to Fleet Command directly. What he offered next was the twist nobody in that war room had prepared for. The compact fleet is 1 million ships, he said, but it is not 1 million choices. Every captain out there is terrified of failing their overseer. They will not break formation, they will not adapt. Obedience is their strength, and it is also their leash. Cole leaned forward. You're saying they can't think for themselves. I am saying, Ver answered, that they have never had to. The Council of Fleet Command had one final decision to make, and it was the hardest one of the war. Trust an alien defector with the fate of Earth, or reject his help and fight 1 million ships with the numbers humanity actually had. 4,000 vessels, no more. General Ihejerica argued against it until his voice cracked. He's compact. This could be the trap that finishes what the blockade started. But Imani Farouk, the scientist who had found him half dead in a lifeboat, stood her ground. He had every chance to let us think he was human, adjacent, and harmless. Instead he told us the truth about a doctrine that could get him executed by his own people for treason. That's not a trap. That's a man who's done being afraid. Cole made the call in 11 seconds. Sometimes command wasn't about certainty, it was about which kind of wrong you could live with. We fight with him, she said. Prep the Halcyon battle group. We're not meeting them head on, we're going to make 1 million ships forget how to be one fleet. Everything changed in the next 12 minutes. At 6:58 p.m., with 2 hours left on the compact's ultimatum clock, human strike squadrons didn't charge the blockade, they slipped through gaps in its rigid formation, gaps that existed only because no compact captain would deviate from a science position without an order from above. Devon Osei led the first cut, the Halcyon diving through a 2-kilometer seam team between two capital ships that never should have left that seam open. His weapons officer, a 19-year-old named Priya Anand, who'd enlisted 8 months ago, put 2 torpedoes into an unshielded reactor core and watched a warship the size of a city die in silence. That's one, she breathed. That's the beginning, Devon corrected, because the true weapon wasn't the torpedoes. It was chaos. Every human strike disrupted the compact's chain of command, and every disrupted command chain meant compact captains froze, waiting for orders that came too late or not at all. The compact fleet's greatest strength had just become its execution. Overseer Threl Magan, commanding the blockade from his flagship, watched his formation crumble ship by ship and felt something he had never permitted himself before. Doubt. Reform the outer ring, he ordered. Sir, we're taking losses faster than. Reform the outer ring, but there was no outer ring left to reform. There was only 1 million ships that had spent their entire existence being told exactly where to be, and had never once been asked to think for themselves about where they should go next. Threl had trained his whole life to command an unbeatable machine. He had never trained to command people. And in that moment, Verkaith's voice crackled over an intercepted channel, translated and broadcast to every compact vessel by human engineers who had cracked the encryption in under an hour. Overseer. This is Verkaith, formerly of the 9th Scout Wing. You told us the humans were monsters so we would never ask if the war was worth fighting. Ask now. Ask before there's no one left to answer. The truth stunned an entire armada. Compact ships began breaking away, not defecting, not surrendering, simply stopping, captains suddenly forced to decide for themselves, for the first time in their careers, whether obedience was worth dying for. The council had made a terrible mistake, and it was only now becoming clear. Back on the compact's homeworld, seated safely behind a wall of screens light years from the battle, the Overseer Council watched their 1,000,000-ship blockade dissolve in real time and argued about whose fault it would be. Councillor Draeth Voss, who had championed the blockade from the beginning, insisted the humans must have some hidden superweapon, some trick beyond what any scout had reported. There is no superweapon, said Councillor Ilieth Sorn. The lone Senting voice who had opposed the invasion from the start. There is a fleet that trusted obedience more than judgment, fighting a species that trained its people to think for themselves, when everything fell apart. We built an army of followers, and sent it against an army of decision-makers. We should have known which one wins when the plan breaks. No one on the council answered her. But far away, in the dying light of the battle, Threl Magan was about to prove her right in the worst possible way. Threl Magan made his final decision alone, the way he'd been trained to, the way that had never once prepared him for this. He aimed his flagship not at the human fleet, but at Earth itself. One last strike, a message to the Compact's masters that the mission had at least been attempted to its bloody end. Admiral Cole had known someone would try exactly that. It was why the Halcyon battle group had never actually been the main force at all. It was the decoy. The real weapon was already in position, hidden in the debris field, left by 200 years of quiet, careful, unglamorous engineering. Earth's actual planetary defense grid, built not on reputation, not on rumor, but on 2 centuries of humans who refused to bet their homeworld on a story. When Threl's flagship crossed the final threshold, the grid didn't erase it with overwhelming force. It didn't need to. It simply closed every gap the Halcyon group had spent all night creating, and the remaining compact fleet, already broken, already leaderless, already full of captains who no longer knew if they were fighting for a cause or just following a habit, had nowhere left to run and no will left to fight. 1 million Shem ships arrived to erase a myth. What was left of them limped home having learned the truth was worse. 3 weeks later, Verkaeth stood on the observation deck, where Admiral Cole had first watched the blockade descend, and asked the question that had haunted him since the ceasefire. Was it true, the second cataclysm? Did you ever burn 3 worlds? Cole was quiet for a long moment, watching Earth turn peacefully below them. No, she finally said, we never had to burn anything, we just let people believe we might. It kept us alive for 200 years. Right up until someone finally called our bluff. And now? Now the galaxy doesn't need a myth to be afraid of us. Cole allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Now they've seen what we actually are. And it turns out that was enough. Ver looked out at the stars. At the wreckage still being cleared from Earth's orbit, at a species that had won not with the fear it built, but with the truth it had been hiding all along. That humans didn't need to be monsters to be unbreakable. They only needed each other. Then let them tell a new story, he said quietly. Admiral Cole nodded, and somewhere far beyond the ruins of a defeated armada, the story had already begun to spread. Not of a fleet that couldn't be beaten, but of a species that couldn't be broken. And that story needed no lie to survive. Asterisk.